Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Try to remember the exact smell of a crisp, cold morning in 1980s Hungary. Perhaps it is the scent of fresh langos frying at a tiny street stand, or the heavy, sweet exhaust fumes of an approaching yellow Icarus bus rumbling down the street. We are going back to a time that belongs entirely to us, a time of our youth. Today, we are going to explore 20 perfectly normal, everyday things from our past that are considered completely illegal, highly regulated, or utterly absurd today. But as we take this journey, you might realize that the very last thing on our list reveals a heartbreaking truth about what we have truly lost in this modern, tightly regulated world. Back in those days, time simply flowed differently. It moved slower, without the frantic, breathless rush of the modern digital age. We lived in the era of goulash communism, where waiting was an art form. We waited years for a telephone line to be installed, and even longer for a brand new car. But that waiting taught us profound patience. It forced us to rely on human connection. There is a common myth today that because we lacked modern technology and endless consumer choices, our lives must have been empty or emotionally poor. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Life was incredibly rich with sincerity. We found our joy around cramped kitchen tables covered with oilcloth, sharing stories over a glass of strong homemade palinka. We solved our problems not by searching the internet, but by knocking on a neighbor's door. The rules of society were rigid on paper, but beautifully flexible in reality. As we look at these vanished practices, remember that we are not just talking about old laws. We are talking about a time when human trust was the most important currency we had. Now, let us remember the simple act of going to the local grocery store, the beloved Közért. If you close your eyes, you can almost smell the unique aroma of fresh, crescent-shaped kifli bread mingling with the scent of roasted coffee beans. Back in the 1980s, it was a completely normal daily ritual for a 7-year-old child to be sent down to the corner store with a handwritten note and a handful of heavy aluminum forint coins. Your father would ask you to buy a pack of Symphonia cigarettes and perhaps 2 bottles of Gorenje beer. You would stand on your tiptoes to hand the money to the friendly cashier in the blue smock, who knew your entire family by name. There were no questions asked, no demands for an identity card, and no strict age restrictions enforced. You would carefully carry the glass bottles home in a woven string bag, feeling deeply proud of this grown-up responsibility. The cold glass would press against your leg as you walked. Today, the very idea of a small child buying tobacco and alcohol is absolutely illegal and unthinkable. It would probably result in a call to the authorities, but back then it was just an ordinary Tuesday evening. It was a world built on profound local trust, where the neighborhood watched out for you, and where a child's independence was cultivated through these small, everyday errands. And what about the way we used to travel? Picture a warm summer weekend, the whole family cramming into a tiny pale yellow Trabant. The unmistakable high-pitched rattling sound of the 2-stroke engine still echoes in our memories, accompanied by the distinct, sweet smell of the petrol and oil mixture billowing from the exhaust. Back then, squeezing 4 or even 5 people into that small fiberglass shell was just how things were done. Seatbelts in the back seat? They simply did not exist. It was perfectly normal for young children to bounce around in the back, leaning over the front seats, or even sitting proudly on their father's lap to help steer the car down a quiet country road. You could feel the sticky, hot vinyl seats against your bare legs and the warm breeze rushing through the rolled-down windows. Today, highway patrols and modern safety laws would immediately impound the vehicle and hand out massive fines for such reckless endangerment. Child safety seats and rigorous buckling up are the absolute law now, but in those days we felt completely safe. We were not insulated from the world by airbags and warning sensors. Every bumpy ride to Lake Balaton was a grand, slightly perilous adventure that bonded the family together in that tiny, noisy, shaking cabin. Let us travel in our minds to the western border, specifically to the legendary crossing at Hegyeshalom. In the late 1980s, a massive wave of shopping tourism began, creating situations that would be considered serious customs smuggling today. Hungarian families would pack into their Lada or Wartburg cars, armed with carefully saved Western currency, and drive to Vienna. The ultimate prize was always a Gorenje deep freezer. It was entirely normal to see tiny cars returning to the border with a massive, heavy white refrigerator strapped precariously to the roof rack with flimsy ropes. Inside the car, hidden under the seats and stuffed inside coats, were bricks of Julius Minor coffee, tropical fruits, and Austrian chocolates. Evading the strict celestial customs duties was considered a national sport, not a crime. The tension in the car as the border guard approached was palpable. Today, hauling uncertified heavy appliances across international borders on a passenger car roof while dodging import taxes would lead to severe legal trouble and confiscation. But for our generation, that smuggled freezer was a symbol of freedom. The hum of that Gorenje in the kitchen was the sound of a small, triumphant victory over a system that tried to limit our access to the wider world. As the long grey winters finally began to melt away, a beautiful and delicate tradition emerged in the early days of March. Entire families would venture into the damp, muddy forests to forage for the first signs of spring. We were looking for the wild snowdrop or horvidag. You could smell the wet earth and decaying autumn leaves as you gently plucked the tiny, white, bell-shaped flowers from the frozen ground. Children would gather large bunches, wrapping the fragile stems in wet paper towels or tinfoil to keep them fresh. It was the most common and beloved gift for Women's Day. Street vendors would stand on bustling Budapest corners, selling small bouquets for a few coins. Today, picking a single wild snowdrop in Hungary is strictly illegal. The flower is highly protected by environmental laws, and plucking even one can result in a devastating financial fine. The authorities have rightfully stepped in to protect the fading natural habitats. But for those who grew up in the 70s and 80s, the memory of wandering freely through the silent, awakening woods, carefully searching for those white petals, remains a deeply cherished childhood treasure. It was a time when the gifts of nature felt boundless and belonged to everyone who took the time to look for them. When the deepest freezes of winter arrived, the rural landscape came alive with a ritual that modern European health inspectors would instantly shut down today. The traditional Hungarian pig slaughter, or disznóvágás, was the cornerstone of winter survival and family unity. You would wake up in the pitch-black dawn, the air so incredibly cold that every breath turned to thick white steam. The day began with a shot of strong, homemade plum palinka to warm the blood. Relatives and neighbours gathered in muddy backyards, working together to process the meat on wooden tables right out in the open air. You could smell the intense aroma of singed hair, wood smoke, and the heavy scent of onions frying in fat for the blood sausages. There were no sterile stainless steel counters, no hairnets, and absolutely no government veterinary inspectors stamping the meat for approval. It was a bloody, loud, and joyous communal effort. Today, strict European Union hygiene regulations and animal welfare laws make this traditional backyard practice heavily restricted or entirely illegal in many contexts. Yet, those chaotic, freezing days produced not just smoked sausages that lasted all year, but a profound sense of community reliance. We did not need official certificates because we had the inherited wisdom of our grandparents. Imagine the long, golden summers spent on the shores of Lake Balaton, the legendary Hungarian sea. Back then, it was perfectly normal to pack up a heavy canvas tent and simply pitch it wherever you found a beautiful grassy spot near the water. This practice, known as vadcampingezés, or wild camping, was the ultimate expression of summer freedom. You could smell the distinct, slightly muddy scent of the lake water, mixing with the aroma of sunscreen and a pot of Lexo stew simmering on a portable gas stove. Families would claim a patch of shade under a weeping willow tree, sleeping under the stars for weeks at a time without paying a single filler. We washed our dishes in the lake and lived in complete harmony with the outdoors. Today, pitching a tent outside designated commercial campsites is strictly forbidden by environmental and local zoning laws. You would be quickly fined and chased away by park rangers. The shores are now fenced off, privatized and heavily regulated, but those free summer nights, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves against the reeds, swatting away mosquitoes and sharing a watermelon cooled in the lake water, gave us a sense of boundless liberty that money simply cannot buy today. As the vibrant colors of autumn began to fade, a very specific and nostalgic fragrance would blanket the entire country. It was the smell of burning autumn leaves. Every weekend in October and November, neighbors would be out in their gardens, the rhythmic sounds of wooden rakes scratching against the soil echoing down the street. We would gather the fallen leaves into huge piles and set them on fire, right there in the yard. The thick, sweet, earthy smoke would billow up into the cool twilight air, creating a hazy, magical atmosphere over the whole neighborhood. Children would stand close to the flames, watching the glowing red embers and tossing in small twigs, completely mesmerized by the crackling fire. Today, this cozy autumn ritual is strictly banned across almost all municipalities due to strict air quality and environmental protection laws. Lighting a fire of damp leaves in a suburban garden will quickly result in an angry visit from the authorities and a hefty fine. We now bag our leaves in identical plastic sacks for municipal collection. We breathe cleaner air, undeniably, but we have lost that deeply comforting, smoky perfume that signaled the changing of the seasons and the slow approach of winter. Let us turn to a habit that permeated absolutely every aspect of daily life, yet seems utterly unimaginable now. In the 1970s and 80s, smoking was not just common, it was an unavoidable, normalized background to our lives. Close your eyes and recall the iconic red and white pack of Symphonia, or the strong Munka cigarettes. The sharp sound of a striking match was the soundtrack of the era. People smoked everywhere, without exception. They smoked on the yellow trams, in the narrow booths of the local espresso bars over a glass of unicum, and even at their desks in crowded government offices. You would go to the doctor's waiting room, and the air would be thick with blue smoke. Curtains in every home were perpetually stained a faint yellow, and your clothes always carried the heavy scent of tobacco. Today, smoking in enclosed public spaces, public transport, or near hospitals is strictly outlawed, heavily fined, and socially condemned. We have rightly prioritized public health, but looking back, that constant haze was simply the texture of adult life. The shared light of a cigarette on a cold railway platform was a moment of connection, a brief pause in a slowly growing world that has now completely vanished into thin air. Do you remember the hushed, secretive conversations that took place on Váci Street in the heart of Budapest? Navigating the black market for foreign currency was a thrilling, highly illegal reality of life behind the Iron Curtain. Because the state strictly limited how much Western money you could officially buy, ordinary citizens were forced to become amateur smugglers. You can still feel the anxiety in your chest and the crisp texture of a highly coveted West German mark or an Austrian shilling slipped quietly into your palm. The local Hungarian forint was soft and familiar, but Western money felt like a golden ticket. Men in leather jackets would whisper exchange rates from doorways. Buying this currency was an absolute crime, punishable by severe consequences from the economic police. Yet, doctors, teachers, and factory workers all did it just to afford a pair of genuine Levi's jeans or a modern cassette player from a Western boutique. Today, Stepping into a brightly lit bank to exchange currency is mundane, entirely legal, and instantaneous. The element of danger is gone. But those secret handshakes in alleyways taught us resourcefulness and resilience, making the eventual purchase of a Western treasure feel like a massive personal triumph. Consider the very roofs over our heads. If you walked through any developing suburb or countryside village back then, you would see houses proudly adorned with distinct grey diamond-shaped tiles. This was the famous Eternit roofing, made entirely of asbestos. It was the absolute standard building material, praised for being cheap, durable, and fireproof. You can almost feel the rough, dusty texture of those rigid tiles as fathers and uncles passed them up a wooden ladder with their bare hands. We collected rainwater that ran off those roofs to water our vegetable gardens. Children would play in the dirt right beneath the eaves where the tiles were cut, inhaling the invisible dust. Today, the use, sale, and even the uncertified removal of asbestos is a serious environmental crime, heavily penalized due to its devastating, lethal health effects. Specialized teams in hazmat suits are required to touch what our fathers handled in shorts and sandals. We were utterly innocent and completely ignorant of the invisible dangers lurking in our own homes. The transition away from these materials was necessary for our survival, but it reminds us of how much trust we blindly placed in the materials that built our childhood sanctuaries. Let us record the intense dedication it took to consume Western media. Long before the era of instant digital streaming, we were a nation of passionate, accidental pirates. You probably remember the heavy, satisfying clack of the dual cassette deck buttons as you pressed record and play at the exact same moment. We would sit for hours by the radio, waiting for the weekly broadcast of Western pop music, desperately trying to hit record before the Hungarian radio host talked over the introduction of a new Queen or ABBA song. And then came the home video era. We passed around degraded third-generation videotapes of American action movies. You can still hear that legendary, muffled, monotonous single-voice dubbing, where one bored Hungarian man voiced every single character, from the tough hero to the crying child. Distributing and copying copyrighted international media was a massive violation of intellectual property laws, a practice that would invite harsh lawsuits today. But back then, these bootleg tapes were our only window into a forbidden world. The terrible audio quality and the fuzzy, rolling tracking lines on the television screen did not matter. What mattered was the magical feeling of gathering around the television, experiencing a slice of the outside world together. There was an unspoken rule in our society, a quiet transaction that took place in the sterile, echoing hallways of every hospital. It was the practice of giving halepens, or gratitude money. You can clearly picture the small, crisp, white envelope tucked discreetly into a nervous palm. When a loved one needed surgery, or even basic maternity care, you would find a quiet moment to shake the doctor's hand, slipping the envelope into the deep pocket of their white coat. You could smell the harsh medicinal alcohol of the ward as this silent exchange occurred. It was not seen as a malicious bribe, but rather an absolute necessity. The socialist healthcare system was theoretically free, but everyone knew that to ensure a clean bed, gentle care, and the doctor's full attention, you had to pay out of pocket. Just recently, the Hungarian government made the offering and accepting of gratitude money a punishable criminal offence, strictly outlawing the practice to clean up the medical system. Today, slipping cash to a surgeon could lead to arrests, but in those days it was simply how you showed love and desperation for your family's well-being, navigating a broken system with the only tool you had available. Think back to the sprawling concrete panel housing estates, the lakotelep that defined urban living. In the afternoons, the spaces between these giant grey blocks belonged entirely to the children. From the moment school ended until the evening, kids as young as 6 years old roamed completely unsupervised. You can still hear the rhythmic echo of a rubber ball bouncing against the concrete, the squeak of rusty metal swings, and the shouts of children playing tag in the dusty courtyards. We wore keys around our necks on a simple string. We scraped our knees, painted them with stinging red iodine, and went right back out. The only rule was to be home when the buzzing amber streetlights finally flickered on. Today, leaving a young child to wander a massive urban neighborhood completely unattended for hours would be considered gross parental negligence, potentially involving child protective services. Modern parents track their children on smartphones and schedule supervised playdates, but our mothers simply opened the door and trusted the neighborhood. That absolute freedom taught us how to resolve our own conflicts, navigate our surroundings, and build a resilient independence that modern childhood rarely allows. There was a unique moral flexibility regarding property in the era of state ownership. Because the factories, farms, and workshops theoretically belonged to the people, many believed that taking a little piece of it home was perfectly justified. We did not call it stealing, we called it borrowing or acquiring. Imagine the heavy metal lunchboxes men carried home from the state-run manufacturing plants. Inside, hidden beneath an empty thermos, might be a handful of steel screws, a useful tool, a tin of industrial paint, or some leftover copper wire. You could smell the heavy machine grease on their hands. These materials were quietly used to repair our own homes or fix a neighbor's tractor. Today, taking supplies from your corporate employer is straightforward theft, leading to immediate termination and criminal charges. Security cameras and inventory audits have eliminated this grey area. But under a system of chronic shortages, where buying basic hardware was often impossible, bringing home a few nails was considered a fringe benefit of hard labor. It was a silent rebellion against an inefficient system, a way for everyday people to quietly reclaim a tiny fraction of the wealth they were supposedly building for the state. The privilege of travel was marked by the color of a small, stiff booklet. In our nightstands we kept our passports, but they were not the universal keys to the world that they are today. The rough texture of the blue passport allowed us to visit friendly socialist nations like East Germany or Bulgaria. But to cross the Iron Curtain, to travel west, you needed the highly coveted, incredibly difficult to obtain, red passport. And even with it, you needed a special window in your document and an allocation of hard currency, which was only granted once every 3 years. You remember the smell of the bureaucratic ink, the long hours waiting in silent, intimidating police offices, and the humiliating interrogations about your reasons for leaving. Today, restricting a citizen's right to leave their own country is a severe violation of international human rights law. The modern European Union allows us to drive from Budapest to Paris without even slowing down at a border check. But the immense bureaucratic nightmare of the past made us appreciate the absolute miracle of crossing a border. When you finally got that stamp, the sheer weight of holding that red passport in your hands felt like holding a precious, fragile bird. Along the dusty, sun-baked rural roads and major highways, a form of transportation thrived that is largely viewed with deep suspicion today. Hitchhiking was an entirely normal, everyday way to get across the country. University students, soldiers on leave, and even ordinary workers would stand by the side of the road, holding up a piece of cardboard with the destination scribbled on it. You can almost taste the dust kicked up by a passing IFA or Kamaz truck and feel the blast of hot exhaust fumes. Drivers would pull over without hesitation, opening the heavy metal doors of their cabins to total strangers. You would climb up, settle onto the worn seat, and spend the next 3 hours engaged in deep, honest conversations with a person you would never see again. Today, hitchhiking on major highways is technically illegal and heavily fined for safety reasons, and society warns us constantly about the extreme dangers of getting into strangers' cars. Trust has been replaced by fear and ride-sharing applications on our phones, but back then, It was an unspoken social contract. It was a beautiful network of mutual assistance, built on the solid belief that a fellow citizen standing by the road was simply a neighbour who needed a helping hand. If you lived in an apartment building with a central courtyard, your Saturday mornings were often scored by a very specific, aggressive symphony. At 7 in the morning, the ritual of beating the carpets began. You can vividly picture dragging a heavy, colourful Persian-style rug down the stairwell and draping it over the sturdy metal racks permanently installed in the yard. Then came the thick, woven wicker carpet beater. The rhythmic, explosive thuds echoed loudly against the brick walls, sending sparkling clouds of grey dust flying into the sharp morning sunlight. Neighbours would lean out of their windows, chatting over the noise, while others waited their turn. Today, hauling dusty carpets into a shared space and violently beating them at dawn would violate countless modern municipal noise ordinances and strata bylaws. You would be reported for causing a disturbance and polluting the air. We now use silent robotic vacuums in our sealed apartments. We have gained quiet mornings, but we have lost those accidental courtyard encounters, the physical exertion of cleaning our homes by hand, and the lively, noisy heartbeat of a shared residential community. Deep in the countryside, hidden inside wooden sheds and behind overgrown gardens, a quiet rebellion fermented in large plastic barrels. The traditional distilling of homemade plum or apricot palinka was an ancient rite, yet for a long time, doing it without state permission and heavy taxation was highly illegal. You can undoubtedly recall the sweet, overwhelming, almost sickening stench of fermenting fruit mash. Then, the careful assembly of the gleaming copper pipes and the slow heating of the still. Families would gather in the damp, cool sheds, watching intently for that very first crystal-clear drop of liquid to emerge. When you tasted it, that fiery, unaged spirit burned a path straight down your throat, bringing tears to your eyes and warmth to your chest. The financial police were always a looming threat, ready to confiscate illegal stills and issue massive fines. Today, home distilling is legally permitted up to a certain volume, regulated by clear tax laws. The absolute thrill of the illicit operation is gone. But when we hid those glass jugs in the cellar, we were not just making alcohol. We were preserving our heritage, fiercely protecting a piece of our culture from the overreaching hands of the state. The line between urban life and rural farming was wonderfully blurred in those days. It was perfectly normal to keep livestock right in the backyards of suburban homes and small towns. You would step out your back door into the morning dew, smelling the distinct earthy aroma of chicken feed, damp straw and manure. People kept loud, crowing roosters, clucking hens and even a pig or two in small wooden sties just meters away from their kitchen windows. You remember the warmth of a freshly laid egg in your palm. Today, strict zoning laws, sanitation regulations, and neighbourhood covenants make keeping farm animals in residential urban areas completely illegal. A crowing rooster or a smelly pig pen would result in immediate citations and angry lawsuits from neighbours demanding peace and pristine property values. Our modern neighbourhoods are cleaner, quieter, and completely disconnected from the food we eat. That chaotic, noisy blend of city and country life taught us exactly where our sustenance came from, embedding a deep respect for nature and animals right into the fabric of our everyday suburban existence. Finally, let us remember how we built our homes. We did not rely on expensive contractors or sterile development companies. We relied on the kaláka. This was the beautiful, unstructured tradition of reciprocal community building. When a young couple needed a house, 20 men from the neighbourhood would show up on a Saturday morning. You can feel the rough, abrasive texture of fresh cement on your hands as you pass red bricks down a long human chain. You can smell the sweat, the wet mortar, and the scent of cold beer opened on makeshift wooden scaffolding. Men worked in old shorts and rubber flip-flops. There were no hard hats, no safety harnesses, and absolutely no building permits or safety inspectors on site. Today, organizing an unregulated, uninsured construction site with untrained volunteers would lead to severe legal penalties, massive fines, and immediate shutdowns by labor authorities. The modern world demands certified professionals and strict liability, but the kaláka was the purest form of solidarity. When you looked at your finished house, you did not just see walls and a roof, you saw the sweat, the laughter, and the unquestionable loyalty of every single neighbor who helped you lay the foundation of your life. When we look back at all these banned, restricted, or forgotten practices, a profound realization washes over us. We do not genuinely miss the danger of riding without seatbelts, nor do we miss the toxic asbestos roofs or the suffocating smoke in public places. What we truly miss is the overwhelming sense of trust, the deep connection with our neighbors, and the beautiful simplicity of a world that relied on human decency rather than endless legal regulations. We miss our youth, and we miss the time when we belonged to each other in ways that feel almost illegal to experience today. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel so we can continue this journey through time together. And now, I would love to hear from you. What is one completely normal thing you did in your childhood that would absolutely shock people today? Please, share your personal story in the comments below and let us keep these precious memories alive for just a little while longer.